I fix broken clocks. That's what I do now that I'm retired. People bring me things that have stopped working, things everyone else has given up on, and I open them up, find the broken piece, and make them tick again. But there's one thing I've never been able to fix with a screwdriver: my son's conscience. So I use something else entirely. Let me tell you how. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You are going to love it here. My name is Edmund Price. I am 60 years old, retired mechanical engineer, father of one, husband to a woman who has made every room she has ever walked into a little more worth being in. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a house on the edge of the historic district, where the Spanish moss hangs so low off the oaks it brushes the roof of my workshop. That workshop is a converted garage. 17 clocks on the walls, all ticking, none synchronized. My wife Charlotte says it sounds like a room full of people trying to talk at the same time, but I hear something different. I hear patience. Every tick is a small act of waiting. Charlotte was a librarian for 31 years at the Chatham County Public Library on Bull Street. She is precise and warm and deeply dignified, and she spent 4 months helping plan our son's wedding like it was the final chapter of a novel she had been writing since the day he was born. She had written Miles a letter the night before. 7 pages. I heard her at the desk past midnight, pen scratching steady, and once, just once, a sound that might have been crying, or might have been laughing. With Charlotte, those two sounds live very close together. I know every word in those 7 pages was love. The kind you spend 32 years accumulating and one night trying to fit onto paper. She deserved that day. Hold that in your mind as I tell you what happened next. Our son Miles married a woman named Josephine on the last Saturday of October in a restored antebellum estate 12 miles outside Savannah. Oak trees forming a canopy over the entrance, light coming through the moss in gold threads, white tents, string lights, a 5-tier cake Charlotte had opinions about. She had cried twice, before the ceremony even started. I kissed her on the temple, and she whispered, "Edmund, it is perfect." 20 minutes before the ceremony, I stepped away to check on the seating arrangements near the family table inside the covered pavilion. Charlotte's chair had a cream silk ribbon tied to the back, with a tag that read "Mother of the Groom" in her own handwriting. She had made it herself. She had been proud of it. That is when I saw Josephine. She was standing over Charlotte's chair, body angled away from the entrance as if she had calculated the sightlines. In her hand was something small. Orange cap. Industrial adhesive. The kind that bonds in seconds and does not forgive. She was pressing it into the fabric of the seat cushion. Not rushed. Not nervous. Deliberate. The way someone does something they have thought about before. And standing at the far end of the pavilion, approximately 5 feet behind her, champagne glass in his left hand, phone pressed to his ear with his right in a conversation I am entirely certain was not happening, was my son. Miles. My blood. He was not on the phone. His eyes were scanning the room, checking entrances, watching the perimeter. He was standing guard. I did not count seconds. I counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each one landed in my chest like a small hammer striking an anvil. 5 heartbeats to understand what I was seeing. 5 heartbeats to feel the full weight of it settle into the place where fathers keep the things they cannot say out loud. My son. Watching the room. While his bride poisoned the only chair that mattered. I turned around. I walked back through the magnolia path and found the venue coordinator near the bar station. A young man with an earpiece and a clipboard. I approached him the way I approach a broken clock. Calm hands, steady voice, absolute certainty about what needs to happen next. I need 2 chairs switched at the family table inside the pavilion. The one with the cream ribbon and the one directly across from it. Can you do that in the next 8 minutes without drawing attention? He blinked once. There is $40 in it for you. He blinked again. Then the chairs moved. I returned to Charlotte. She looked at me and said, "You have that look." "What look?" "The Whitfield contract look." I smiled. Charlotte knew me the way master clockmakers know their oldest mechanism. Every gear, every spring, every silence between the ticks. But she did not know what I had just seen. And I decided, standing in the gold light of the most beautiful Saturday in October, that she would not know today. Today belonged to Charlotte. Not today. Not here. Not in front of the gardenias and the 5-tier cake and the 7-page letter she had poured her whole heart into. The ceremony began. Charlotte reached for my hand and held it so tightly I felt her pulse against my palm. Miles stood at the altar looking like the best version of himself, and for one moment, one unguarded moment, I forgot. I forgot the orange cap. I forgot the champagne glass disguise. I forgot the 5 feet of comfortable distance between a son and his conscience. I watched him watching Josephine walk down the aisle and I thought, he loves her. That part I believed. What I could not reconcile, what sat behind my ribs like a gear with a broken tooth, was how a man who loved a woman could stand watch while she tried to humiliate his mother. Not stop it. Not confront it. Stand watch. The reception began under the string lights and the Spanish moss, and for a while it almost felt like any other wedding. Music drifting from a 4-piece jazz band Charlotte had chosen herself. Laughter filling the pavilion. Champagne catching the lantern light like small amber fires in every hand. Charlotte was radiant. There is no other word for it. She danced with Miles during the mother-son song, some old melody I cannot name but will never forget, and I watched her face from across the floor. Open. Full. Completely unsuspecting. And I made myself a quiet promise right there on that dance floor. Not today. Not here. Not in front of her. Today was still hers. I sat down at the family table. Across from me, in the chair that had originally been designated for Charlotte, now occupied by Josephine, everything appeared perfectly normal. She was laughing with Whitney, her maid of honor, adjusting her veil, glowing the way brides glow when they believe the whole world is looking at them with love. Then Clyde took the microphone. Clyde was the MC, a friend of Josephine's family, one of those men who believed volume was a substitute for wit. Big voice, bigger bow tie, relentless crowd work. He had been mildly tolerable during cocktail hour. He was about to become the most consequential man of my evening entirely by accident. All right, Savannah. Before we get into the toasts, I want to do something special. Josephine, sweetheart, would you stand up for us? Give this beautiful room a proper look at that dress. The room cheered. Josephine smiled that practiced, luminous smile. She placed both hands on the table edge, pushed herself up, and then the sound. It was not loud. It did not need to be. In that half-second pocket of silence between the cheering dying down and the next breath beginning, there it was. Fabric tearing. Clean. Decisive. Like a single stitch being pulled from something that was never meant to come apart. Josephine froze. The smile stayed on her face. I will give her that much. But her eyes traveled somewhere else entirely, somewhere internal. Somewhere that understood exactly what had happened before her hands confirmed it. Her right hand moved behind her instinctively, and whatever she felt there made the smile flicker once, like a bulb on a dying circuit. Whitney was at her side in 2 seconds, whispering, body blocking the view from the nearest tables. Clyde pivoted smoothly, the way mediocre comedians pivot when a joke dies. Beautiful, absolutely stunning. Let us give it up for our bride. Applause filled the gap. The moment passed for most of the room, but not for Miles. I was watching Miles. I am always watching Miles. He had gone very still in his chair. His jaw tightened. His fingers pressed white against the stem of his champagne glass. And his eyes cut across the table, not to Josephine, not to Whitney, to me. And I looked right back at him. Steady, warm, smiling. The warmest, most terrifying smile I have ever produced in 60 years of living. I raised my glass slightly, The way you do when you are toasting someone across a crowded room. He looked away first. Later that night, Hank found me outside on the estate steps. Jacket off, tie loosened, watching the Spanish moss sway in the evening breeze like slow pendulums. Hank Calloway, my oldest friend. We had worked together at the firm for 22 years before I retired. He was the kind of man who said exactly what he meant and expected you to do the same, which made him either the best or the worst person to talk to depending on what you were hiding. Edmund. Hank. We were quiet for a long moment, the way men our age know how to be quiet. The jazz band played something slow inside. The string lights swayed. Then he said, "You switched the chairs, did you not?" It was not a question. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Edmund, it is a beautiful night, Hank." He laughed, short and low, and shook his head. "You have the face, the Whitfield contract face, the face you had before you dismantled Patterson's entire department without raising your voice once." He studied me. "What are you going to do?" I picked up my water glass. I looked at the moss, at the lights, at the dark sky above Savannah where the stars were doing their ancient, indifferent work. "Tonight? Nothing. Tonight belongs to Charlotte." Hank nodded slowly. Then, after a beat, "And tomorrow?" I stood up, straightened my jacket, finished my water. "Tomorrow," I said, "I am going to open the back of the clock." Hank stared at me. Then he said very quietly, "Lord have mercy on that boy." And that was the most dangerous thing I ever said at a wedding. Not colder, not distant. Warmer. Because cold, people can prepare for. Cold, people see coming. But warm lowers every defense. Warm makes you pour another drink and laugh a little too loud and forget, completely forget, that the man smiling across the table has been recording every tick. That was me for the weeks that followed. The kindest, warmest, most attentive father-in-law Savannah has ever seen. God help them. It started the Monday after the wedding. Miles called, which was unusual because Miles communicated primarily through thumbs-up emojis and voice notes recorded while driving. But he called. Actual phone. Actual voice. "Dad. Miles. How is everything? How is Mom?" "She is wonderful. Already talking about having you both over for dinner." Pause. A small pause. The kind that lasts half a second too long. "Yeah, actually, Dad, I wanted to, about the wedding, the chair thing. Josephine's dress got caught on something and..." Silence. "Oh, that. Miles. Nobody even noticed. These things happen at weddings. Listen, are you and Josephine free Sunday? Your mother wants to make her shrimp and grits. You know how she gets when she has not fed somebody in a while." "Yeah. Yeah. We can do Sunday." "Wonderful. 7 o'clock. Do not be late. You know your mother." I hung up. Set the phone down on my workbench beside a disassembled pocket watch, and I sat there for a moment in the quiet of my workshop, surrounded by 17 ticking clocks, and I thought about what my son had just done. He had called to address it. He had been given the opening, and he had chosen comfort over accountability. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He deflected when the door was held open for him and walked right past it. I reached for my car keys. I needed something from Bull Street, something with a leather cover, something that felt permanent. The stationery shop on Bull Street had been there longer than I had been alive. Wooden floors that creaked in the same places they creaked in 1972. Glass display cases with fountain pens arranged like surgical instruments. I found what I was looking for on the second shelf near the window. A leather-bound journal, dark brown, brass clasp, the kind of thing that felt like it would outlast the person writing in it. I bought it, drove home, sat down at my workbench in the workshop and opened it to the first page. I wrote the date. Then I wrote. Miles called. Attempted to address the wedding incident. Deflected when given the opportunity. Did not apologize. Did not explain. Chose comfort over accountability. Sunday dinner confirmed. I capped the pen, closed the journal, placed it in the locked drawer beneath my old project files, right next to the envelope. Because yes, there was already an envelope. Here is something people forget about retired men with time and precision on their hands. We notice things. During the cocktail hour before the ceremony, I had been standing near the pavilion entrance when the wedding photographer passed me doing candid shots. Young woman, quick eye, the kind of instinct that finds the story inside the room before anyone else knows there is one. I had a quiet word with her the following Wednesday. Asked if she might share her full unedited gallery with me once she delivered to the couple. She had said, "Of course. How would you like it sent? Just a physical copy. A USB. Between us." She had looked at me slightly strangely. I had smiled my warmest smile. The USB arrived by mail 9 days later. I went through 387 photographs on a Tuesday afternoon with a cup of black coffee and the patience of a man who has spent 35 years looking for the one broken gear inside a mechanism of 200. Photograph 243. Josephine. Charlotte's chair. The orange cap visible between two fingers. And Miles, 5 feet behind her. Champagne glass raised. Eyes on the room. I printed it on the old laser printer in my study. Placed it in a plain manila envelope. Locked it in the workshop drawer beside the journal. Then I called Charlotte and told her I thought Sunday dinner with the kids sounded wonderful. Sunday came. Charlotte made her shrimp and grits, the recipe her grandmother brought from the Low Country that filled the entire house with a smell so warm it could almost convince you everything was fine. Almost. They arrived together. Josephine in a silk blouse the color of cream. Miles with a bottle of wine he had clearly purchased on the way over, because the price sticker was still half peeled on the bottom. I noted that. Not in the journal. Just in the catalog I was building quietly in the back of my mind. The one with no pages but perfect recall. Dinner was warm. Genuinely warm. Charlotte laughed. Josephine complimented the shrimp and grits twice, which was the correct number of times. Miles told a story about their new apartment that made us all laugh. And I sat at the head of my table being the most engaged, most generous, most present version of Edmund Price I had ever performed. Because here is what I had decided somewhere between the estate steps and that Tuesday afternoon with 387 photographs. I was not going to confront. I was not going to accuse. I was not going to give either of them the gift of knowing what I knew. I was going to show up consistently, generously, inescapably. Because people who do ugly things in secret depend on one thing above everything else. Distance. Distance lets the story they tell themselves stay clean. I was going to remove the distance. God help them. Week 3. Brunch. We were doing brunches now. Josephine mentioned, casually, between bites of Charlotte's buttermilk biscuits, that she and Miles were thinking about the family pew at St. John's. It might be nice, she said, smiling at Charlotte, to let the younger generation sit in the family row. Give you and Edmund a chance to sit somewhere more comfortable. Less drafty. Charlotte laughed it off. She always laughed things off. That was Charlotte. But I watched Josephine's eyes when she said it, and I watched them watch my face. And I understood. The suggestion was not about the pew. It was a perimeter check. She was seeing if I was paying attention. I gave her nothing. Smiled. Asked if anyone wanted more coffee. That night I wrote in the journal, brunch. Josephine suggests relocating Charlotte from family pew at St. John's. Framed as comfort. Watched my face when she said it. Week 4. Josephine proposed replacing Charlotte's pecan pie recipe at Thanksgiving with something, as she put it, a little more modern. Charlotte's pecan pie was her mother's recipe, handwritten on a stained index card that lived in the kitchen drawer like a small, sacred document. Charlotte said nothing. She just smiled and passed the bread. That night I sat in my workshop and connected the points. The chair at the wedding, the pew at church, the recipe at Thanksgiving. This was not a prank. This was not a single moment of bad judgment. This was a pattern. Systematic. Calculated. Josephine was not just targeting Charlotte. She was replacing her. One tradition at a time. One seat at a time. One recipe at a time. I met Hank for lunch at the end of week 4 at the seafood place on River Street. He pushed his menu aside, looked at me across the table, and said, "You are doing the thing." "I am eating shrimp, Hank." "You are doing the Whitfield thing." "How long have you been collecting?" I took a bite. "Collecting what?" "Edmund. It is good shrimp. You should order." He leaned back and studied me the way old friends study each other, like reading a book they have read before and already knowing the ending. "What is the end game?" I set down my fork. "Miles is a good man who made a very bad choice. Maybe 2. Maybe more. I am still counting." I paused. "I am not building a punishment, Hank." "Then what are you building?" I looked at him steadily. "A clock. And when it is finished, it will show them the exact time, the exact moment they chose wrong, and there will be nowhere left to pretend it did not happen." Hank stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his menu and said quietly, "Lord help that boy when the alarm goes off." I picked up my coffee. "Clocks do not have alarms, Hank. They just stop hiding what time it is. Inside every clock, there is a gear you cannot see from the outside. It sits deepest, turns slowest, and does the most important work. If it breaks, the whole mechanism stops, and you will never know why until you open the back and look where no one thinks to look." I found the hidden gear in week 5. It started with an offer. Miles and Josephine had been talking about purchasing a house in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, a quiet street lined with azaleas and sidewalks wide enough for strollers they did not yet need. They needed help with the financial paperwork, mortgage applications, reference letters, the bureaucratic machinery of becoming homeowners. I offered to help. "That is what fathers do," I said, warmly, casually, the way fathers do. Miles accepted, which meant I now had a clear and comprehensive picture of their finances, their timeline, their debts, and most relevantly, their documentation. The first thing I found was the credit reference letter. It had been written by Josephine's uncle, a man named Gerald, and it contained what I can only describe as an optimistic reimagining of Miles's employment history. Dates extended, titles inflated, a promotion that had not yet occurred, described in the past tense. It was not criminal. It was the kind of gray area that people convince themselves is harmless, because no one checks and nothing collapses. Until someone does check. And I was checking. The second thing I found was worse. Josephine's resume, the one she had submitted to the architecture firm where Miles had personally recommended her for a junior project coordinator position, listed a Master of Business Administration from a university in Atlanta. I am a precise man. Precision is not a habit for me. It is a language. So I checked. I checked the way I check a gear ratio. Methodically, without emotion, following the numbers, until they either confirm or deny. They denied. The degree did not exist. I sat in my workshop that evening with the documents spread across my workbench beside a half-assembled carriage clock from 1912. I looked at the fabricated resume. I looked at the embellished reference letter. I looked at the journal in my locked drawer, with its growing catalog of Sundays and brunches, and carefully worded suggestions designed to dismantle my wife's place in her own family. Then I looked at the pocket watch. It sat on the far corner of my workbench, where it had sat for nearly 4 months now, gold case, worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. My father's watch, his father's before him. It was given to me the morning of my wedding, 1991, in a hotel room in Charleston. My father pressed it into my palm and said, "A price man carries this on the day he commits to something permanent. Take care of it. It will tell you things a calendar cannot." I had carried it for 34 years. I had intended to give it to Miles on the morning of his wedding. I had planned to press it into his palm the same way my father had pressed it into mine and say something about permanence and commitment and the kind of time that matters. But 3 weeks before the wedding, it stopped. Just stopped. No damage. No visible fault. The mechanism simply ceased. I had set it aside, meaning to open it up and find the problem. I never did. Now I understood why. I picked it up, held it to my ear. Silence. Not even the ghost of a tick. I set it back down, opened the journal, and wrote, "It is worse than I thought. The mechanism is not just broken. Someone replaced the parts." I locked the drawer, walked into the house. Charlotte called from the kitchen. "Edmund, dinner is ready." I kissed her on the forehead, smiled, sat down at our table, and ate roasted chicken and butter beans and cornbread, while the woman I loved talked about a book she was reading, something about a lighthouse, and I gave her my full attention. Because she deserved it, because she always deserved it, and because not a single soul on this earth, looking at my face in that moment, could have guessed what was locked in the drawer behind me. Week 6. Sunday dinner. Miles arrived looking more relaxed than I had seen him since adolescence. The dinners had softened him. The brunches had softened Josephine, too. She called me Edmund now, instead of the stiff Mr. Price she had used in the early months. She laughed freely. She touched Miles's arm at the table. They had decided, somewhere in those 6 weeks of home-cooked meals and warm conversations, that I did not know, that I was simply a kind, retired father grateful for their company. It almost made me sad. After dinner, while Charlotte and Josephine were in the kitchen discussing a television show they had both been watching, Miles and I sat in the living room. He was loose with the wine, comfortable in the armchair he had claimed since he was 15. He looked at me with something that might have been genuine affection and said, "Dad, I want you to know, these dinners, they mean everything." I looked at my son, this man I had driven to baseball practice and helped with college essays and taught to change a tire in the rain on Route 17. This man I had loved for 32 years without condition and without interruption. "They mean everything to me too, Miles." He smiled, looked into his glass, and I thought, there he is. There is the man I raised. And I thought, what a shame he is only this man when he thinks no one is counting the seconds. I stood up, stretched, walked to the bookshelf to refill my water, and as I passed the side table, I opened the small drawer, just slightly, just enough, and placed the journal inside in plain sight. Miles did not see it, but I knew he would. Eventually. That was the thing about patience. It did not rush. It just waited for the right tick. And the right tick was coming. It came on a Thursday. The tick I had been waiting for. Josephine called Charlotte that afternoon. They spoke regularly now. They had developed what I can only describe as a functional warmth, the kind that exists between two women who are not quite friends, but have agreed to perform the motions. Charlotte was always gracious, always genuine. That was Charlotte. She did not know how to be anything else. The call was about Christmas. Where would they spend it? Whose family? The usual negotiations young couples have that quietly reveal everything about how they see the hierarchy of their life. Josephine wanted Tucson. Her parents, her traditions, her table. Charlotte came to find me in my workshop afterward. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, and for just a moment, one unguarded moment, she looked exactly like what she was. A woman trying very hard to be understanding about something that quietly stung. She wants Christmas in Tucson. I looked up from the carriage clock I was not really working on. I am fine. It is fine. They are young. They are building their own. Charlotte. I am fine, Edmund. Charlotte. Come sit down. She did not sit down. She stood in the doorway and looked at me. And in her eyes I saw something I had been dreading for 91 days. Not anger. Not suspicion. Something worse. Resignation. The slow, quiet acceptance of a woman who was beginning to believe that maybe she simply mattered a little less than she used to. That was the moment. That was the tick. I set down my tools. I took off my work glasses. I looked at my wife of 34 years, and I made a decision I had been approaching slowly, the way you approach something fragile, that you know will change shape the moment you touch it. Charlotte, I need to show you something. She looked at me, and in the eyes of a woman who had lived with Edmund Price for 34 years, who had read 10,000 books and 10,000 faces, there was something that already knew before being told. I opened the locked drawer. I placed the leather journal on the workbench between us. Then the manila envelope with the photograph. Then, from the box beneath my old project files, the documents, the credit reference letter, the resume with the degree that did not exist, the printed timeline, 91 days of Sundays and brunches and careful observations arranged in the order they occurred, each one dated, each one precise, each one written in the steady hand of a man who fixes things for a living. Charlotte picked up the photograph first. She held it close under the workshop lamp. Josephine. The chair. The orange cap between two fingers. Miles, 5 feet behind, champagne glass raised, eyes scanning. She was very still for a very long time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were not wet. They were clear. That particular kind of clear that arrives after something you half suspected has been confirmed in full daylight. How long have you known? Since the wedding. Edmund. Her voice was quiet. Measured. The voice she used when she was holding something heavy with both hands, and did not intend to drop it. That was 3 months ago. 91 days, actually. You sat across from her at 9 Sunday dinners. And 4 brunches. She stared at me. Then she looked back at the photograph. Then back at me. Then she did something I did not expect. She stood up, walked out of the workshop, crossed the hallway into the living room, and went to the bookshelf. 3rd shelf. Far left. She pulled down a book I had seen 1,000 times. Worn leather cover, cracked spine, pages yellowed the way pages yellow when they have been turned by the same hands for 30 years. She opened it to a page that had been dog-eared so long the fold had become a permanent crease in the paper. She read silently for a moment. Then she closed the book and looked at me. Harper Lee wrote that you never really understand a person until you climb into their skin and walk around in it. She set the book down on the workbench beside the journal and the photograph and the 91 days of evidence. I am not ready to climb into Josephine's skin, but I am not ready to throw her out of this family either. A long silence. The 17 clocks on the wall ticked. None of them agreed on the time. That felt appropriate. Then Charlotte said, in a voice so steady it could have leveled a building, "Do not break him, Edmund. Fix him. That is what you do. You fix things that have stopped working." If you have been listening for a while and you want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it is what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you, for real. I reached across the workbench and took Charlotte's hand. Her fingers were cool and certain. We looked at each other across 34 years of marriage, across 9 Sunday dinners, and 4 brunches, and 1 photograph, and 1 journal, and 1 broken pocket watch that had not ticked since 3 weeks before our son's wedding. Sunday, I said. I will invite them to dinner. But not here. Charlotte looked at me. Where? I looked past her, through the workshop door, at the workbench, with its tools and its clocks, and its perfect patient order. Here. The workshop. Charlotte studied my face for a moment. Then she nodded once. The kind of nod that is not agreement, but permission. The kind that says, I trust you. Do not make me regret it. I picked up my phone, dialed Miles. Sunday, 7 o'clock. And bring Josephine. I have something to show you both in the workshop. A clock I have been restoring. I think you will find it interesting. Miles laughed. Sure, Dad. Sounds great. I hung up, looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at the pocket watch, sitting silent on the corner of the workbench. Neither of us said anything. The 17 clocks on the wall filled the room with their small, patient, unsynchronized ticking, and somewhere inside the pocket watch that had not moved in 4 months, I believed. I truly believed. There was still a heartbeat waiting. Sunday arrived, the way consequential days always do. Unremarkable, on the surface. Savannah sunlight filtering pale gold through the Spanish moss. Charlotte made chicken bog instead of shrimp and grits. Small detail. Intentional. Shrimp and grits was a comfort meal, an embrace in a cast-iron skillet. Chicken bog was simply dinner. She was not offering comfort today. She was setting a table for the truth. They arrived at 7. Miles, with his habitual, almost on time energy, grinning about something his friend Lance had texted on the drive over. Josephine, in a gray wrap dress, carrying a store-bought pecan pie she announced she had discovered at a bakery on Broughton Street. She set it on the counter 2 feet from where Charlotte's grandmother's handwritten recipe card sat in its drawer. I noted that. Charlotte noted that. Neither of us said a word. Dinner was pleasant. The new house in Ardsley Park. A neighbor dispute Miles found entertaining. A show Josephine and Charlotte had both been watching. I ate. I listened. I laughed when laughter was expected. Charlotte was extraordinary. If I live to be 100, I will never fully articulate the dignity of that woman passing the breadbasket to the woman who had tried to humiliate her, doing it with a grace so complete it looked like ease. She knew what was coming. She had agreed to it. She had looked at me Wednesday night and said, "Do not destroy him, Edmund. Reach him. There is a difference." After dinner, Charlotte brought coffee. Josephine was mid-sentence about a work deadline. I stood up quietly. "Miles, I have something to show you in the workshop." "Josephine, you should come too." Miles stood immediately, easy, curious. Josephine hesitated for exactly 1 second, a pause so small most people would have missed it. Then she smiled and followed. The workshop was warm, amber light on the workbench, 17 clocks ticking 17 different rhythms, machine oil, and cedar, and stillness. I walked to the workbench and picked up the pocket watch from its corner, held its weight, the smoothness of gold worn by 3 generations. I placed it under the lamp. "This was your grandfather's," I said. "He gave it to me the morning I married your mother, 1991. A hotel room in Charleston. He told me a price man carries this on the day he commits to something permanent." I paused. "I was going to give it to you the morning of your wedding. But it stopped, Miles. 3 weeks before the ceremony. It just stopped." Miles looked at the watch. He did not yet understand. I opened the drawer with the brass lock, lifted out the manila folder, placed it beside the pocket watch, beside the tools, beside the 17 ticking clocks. I opened it. Photograph 243. Josephine, the chair, the orange cap between 2 fingers. Miles 5 feet behind. 15 pages of the leather journal, transcribed. The USB drive in a labeled sleeve. The credit reference letter with the embellished employment history. The resume listing a degree that did not exist. A single handwritten timeline. 91 days. Every dinner. Every brunch. Every suggestion about the church pew. Every remark about the pecan pie. I arranged them on the workbench the way I arrange clock parts before reassembly. Each piece in its place. Miles had gone very still. The color left his face like a tide receding from sand. Josephine's hands moved to grip the edge of the workbench. "Miles, you are a good man," I said. "I want to start there because I mean it, and because what I am about to say has nothing to do with whether I love you. I do. Without condition." I let the clocks fill the space. "But I watched you stand 5 feet behind your wife while she pressed industrial adhesive into your mother's chair at your wedding. And then I watched you spend 91 days hoping I had not." The workshop was so quiet I could hear the kitchen faucet dripping through 2 closed doors. "I am not a lawyer," I said. "I am not going to court. I am not contacting employers or calling families. That is not what this is." I tapped the folder once. "This is a record. A clear, documented record of a pattern that began before your wedding and continued through last Thursday's phone call to your mother." I looked at Josephine directly, gently, without heat. "Charlotte is not optional. She is not a tradition to be revised. She is not a recipe to be replaced. She is not a seat to be reassigned. She is the woman who raised the man you married." I slid the folder to Miles. "That copy is yours. I have another in a location that is not this house. My attorney has a sealed letter describing its contents. Not to be opened. Not to be used." I paused. "Unless something changes." Josephine spoke for the first time. Controlled. Careful. What do you want from us, Edmund? I want you to understand that I see you, clearly, fully, and that I am still standing in this workshop offering you a way forward, because that is what Charlotte asked me to do. And because I believe, on your best day, you are capable of being better than your worst one. Take it home, I said to Miles. Read every page, and sit with what it feels like to be documented by someone who loves you. A sound at the workshop door. Charlotte. She stood in the frame, one hand resting on the wood, lamplight catching the silver in her hair. She had not been in the kitchen. She had been waiting just outside. Because Charlotte was a librarian, she understood timing. She understood when to turn the page. She looked at Josephine. Josephine looked back. A long moment passed between them, heavy and complicated, carrying things that did not yet have names. Then Charlotte said, simply, quietly, with the full weight of 34 years of love and 7 handwritten pages and 9 Sunday dinners of extraordinary grace, I would like us to try. But this time, with the truth between us. The 17 clocks ticked. No one spoke. Miles held the folder against his chest with both hands, eyes wet, jaw trembling. Josephine looked at Charlotte, and something moved across her face. Not quite shame, not quite relief. Something that lived in the complicated territory between the two. Something that might, with enough time and enough honesty, become the beginning of something worth repairing. Miles called on Tuesday morning. 6:47. I know because the clock on my nightstand, a 1958 Westclox, I restored the year I retired, read 6:47 exactly when the phone lit up. He did not start with hey. He did not start with dad. He did not start with anything I expected. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I do not have an explanation that is good enough. I know that. I sat up in bed. Charlotte stirred beside me but did not wake. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water I would not drink, and sat down at the table in the early gray light that comes through Savannah windows before the sun has fully committed to the day. I know you are, son. The folder. His voice cracked. Not performance. Not manipulation. The kind of cracking that happens when something has been held too tightly for too long and finally gives. Reading it. Seeing it written out like that. Every Sunday. Every brunch. Every single thing. Documented. I did not realize how. He stopped. Started again. How did you sit across from me? All those Sundays. I thought about it honestly. I thought about the shrimp and grits and the pecan pie and the 9 Sunday dinners and the 4 brunches and the pocket watch sitting silent on my workbench and Charlotte's face when she stood in the workshop doorway and said she was fine when she was not fine, and the 7-page letter she wrote at midnight that I never read but always knew was love. Because you are my son, I said, and because good clocks do not rush. They just wait for the right second. You just needed a little more time than I expected. He laughed. The broken, humbled kind. The kind that sounds like it is being pulled from somewhere deep and reluctant. You are terrifying, Dad. You know that, right? Your mother says I am perfectly calibrated. Mom is the only saint in this family. Do not tell her that. Her head is the right size, and I would like to keep it that way. He laughed again. Cleaner this time. More like himself. More like the boy who used to sit in my workshop after school and watch me take apart clocks, asking questions about every gear, every spring, every tiny screw. And I would answer every single one because that is what fathers do. They answer the questions, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. We talked for 45 minutes. The longest phone call we had shared in years. No emojis. No voice notes recorded while driving. Just a father and his son finding their way back to each other, one honest word at a time. Before he hung up, he said, Dad, the watch. Grandfather's watch. Can you fix it? I looked across the kitchen toward the workshop door. I believe I can. Will you let me know when it is running again? You will be the first to know. Miles. That evening, after the dishes were done, and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, I went to the workshop. I sat down at my bench. I pulled the lamp close, I picked up the pocket watch, opened the case back with the small tool my father had used before me, and I looked inside. The mainspring was intact. The escapement was clean. The balance wheel was undamaged. There was a single gear, deep inside the mechanism, slightly out of alignment. Not broken, not destroyed, just shifted, just enough to stop the whole thing from working. I adjusted it, set it in place, closed the case, held it to my ear. Tick, tick, tick. Small, steady, certain. The clock was running again. I sat there for a while, holding it, listening. 35 years of fixing broken things, and I have learned that the ones worth saving are never the ones that shatter. They are the ones that go quiet. The ones that stop so gently you almost do not notice, until one day you hold them up and realize the silence has been there longer than you thought. Charlotte found me on the back porch an hour later. She handed me a cup of coffee, black, the way I have taken it since before she knew me. She sat beside me and leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she has done since 1991. We watched the street lamps along the square flicker on, one by one, the way Savannah lights itself every evening, slowly, without rushing, as if the city itself understands that some things are worth taking time over. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like myself." She laughed softly. Dangerous answer. "Mum." She lifted her head and looked at me with those clear, knowing eyes. The eyes of a woman who had read 10,000 books and 10,000 faces, and still found mine the most interesting. "Edmund Price," she said quietly, "you are the most precise, most patient, most impossibly stubborn man I have ever loved." I picked up my coffee. "And yet, in 34 years, you have never once been bored." She laughed, full and warm and real. The kind of laugh that fills a porch and drifts out into the Savannah evening and makes the Spanish moss sway just a little, as if even the trees want to lean closer and listen. The porch light stayed on long after the yard had gone dark. "You know, there is a verse that says the Lord is close to the broken-hearted. I believe that. I have seen it in workshop lamplight at 2 in the morning, and in a wife's steady hand across a kitchen table, and in a son's voice, cracking open at 6:47 on a Tuesday. God does not always fix things the way we expect. Sometimes He puts the tools in your hands and trusts you to find the broken gear yourself. And sometimes, if you are patient enough, if you are still enough, if you love someone enough to sit across from them for 91 days and wait for them to remember who they are, the clock starts ticking again. Not because you forced it, because you gave it the one thing every broken mechanism needs: time. And the steady hands of someone who refused to give up on it. I think about that often, sitting on this porch. I think about how the measure of a man is not whether he makes mistakes. Lord knows we all do. Every last one of us. The measure is what we do when we are the only one in the room who knows the mistake happened. Do we look away? Do we pretend? Or do we pick up the tools and get to work? If this story reached something inside you, I would be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not yet part of this community, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. We tell stories here about family, about truth, about the kind of love that does not shout but never, ever looks away. Thank you for being here. God bless you and the people you are holding close tonight. And the pocket watch, the one that sat silent for 4 months on the corner of a workbench in Savannah, Georgia, it is ticking again. Steady, patient, keeping perfect time, because that is what clockmakers do. They do not tear apart what is broken. They find the right gear, set it in place, and wait. Wait until everything starts keeping time again.